Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Barbara. Let me, first of all, hello everyone. I'm really happy and honored to be part of this amazing event. I would like to thank the organizers, in particular Barbara, for this kind of invitation. And I'm happy to talk about geometry and the applications mainly, which is the main topic of this week lectures and talks. I'm a CNRS researcher in France, working geometrics research team on geometry-driven numerics, which is part of the LIX laboratory and INRIA and Institut Polytechnique de Paris. Let me start with this nice panorama of the mathematical universe created by the Math Institute of the CNRS. And first of all, thanks to my colleague Steve Udo, who provided this picture to me. So as you can see, geometry is in the very core of this nice illustration, and it's indeed what we will talk about today. And given that myself, I'm somehow standing on the interface between geometry and computer science and applications in computer graphics, I think the best I can do is to provide somehow a geometric landscape of what we are doing in our community in terms of applications. But please be aware of the fact that the viewpoint will be very narrow, of course, very personal, given my limited interest and knowledge in this area. I will do my best to summarize some concepts and mainly applicative scenarios in 3 parts during this mini course. So the 2 first parts will be around discrete distribution of circles. So here you don't have any structure that would link this, for example, circles or disks together. It's why we are not still at the circle packing scenario yet. But I would like to mention somehow how interesting are these analysis questions and later the synthesis part that would be linked to it. Then I will start by bringing some structure to it, and like connecting dots, if you want. We will talk about different kinds of diagrams, complexes that you all know about, but we are using a lot in our research in computer graphics, mainly Delaunay complexes, Voronoi diagrams and their generalization. And then I will, little by little, go toward more structures, circle packing setting, as well as some applications in you will see, we can go far in terms of applications. So my goal here would be to somehow sample some applications that I've seen in my own career and to somehow encourage you to see also this side of your research in this. So here is the way I would see it. The 2 first parts will be around the topics and details that that were shared with you in the summary. But I plan to switch maybe slightly. The second and the first lecture will be somehow switched. It would be better in terms of the scenario that I will have in the mini course. I will start with point patterns and then extension to disk patterns, etc., with these kind of applications. And then the very last part, which will be lecture 3, will be on circle patterns. Okay. So if there is no question at this stage, let me detail a little bit the topics that we will see today. So maybe we will detail each of these projects or topics together during this upcoming hour. Here is the lecture 2 plan, outline that you can discover soon, and the very last part, which will be later during the week. So here is the way I usually start my talks, like talking about point patterns. I know that will be very specific to you, but I would like to try to, like mathematicians, geometers, and see if it would be as I mean, it would talk to you as well or not. So for me, the key element of today's talk would be point, dimensionless element in geometry that I cannot even visualize, but the nice part of the research projects that I work on is the fact that we usually work with geometric notions that can be visualized, at least partially. And mainly in this mini course, we'll talk about geometric data sets and patterns that have at least two coordinates, two 2D spatial coordinates that can be embedded and nicely linked to each other and form a meaningful pattern. And then on top of these two coordinates, you can, of course, charge any kind of other attributes as colors, parameters that can be type of these points, temperature. In terms of applications, you can think of any other attributes. Of course, you can go in very high dimensional data sets, but again, we will be limited somehow by our technical toolboxes and computational frameworks. So for the moment, in theory, that's the setting that I will fix for this mini course. We will be in 2D, or at least on a surface that is embedded in 3D, but the spatial data will be somehow two-dimensional. And on top of that, we will have some other attributes that can be interpreted differently. Okay, and what I would like to point out here is that, surprisingly, at least to me at the very first place, when I started to work on these patterns for a very specific applicative scenario, I thought that would be a secondary topic, and that's an easy one for us, so let's do it, and then that will be done. But interestingly enough, I spent like more than 5 years on working on these 2D patterns, and I will show you why I'm so interested in this kind of data. So that was in the context of mutual word uttering. So we wanted to, given some biological data set, like representing different ecosystems, we wanted to, like from a simple example, we wanted to generate other ecosystems, bigger ones, interpolate between them, and really have a nice model of space of ecosystems. So how to handle those data and how to represent them. So the idea is that we are mainly working with vegetation, and vegetation are labeled by their type, and usually we have some information like the size of the trees or mushrooms or whatever you are considering in the ecosystem, and their spatial embedding, right? So the idea is to represent each of these species by disks, like representing, in case of trees, the canopies of each of these tree types. And then we will come up with this kind of distribution over a 2D domain. And the idea would be to, for example, given a exemplar, the one that is on top right, try to extend it to a larger convex, right? So, and having a kind of geometric or statistical feature that would allow us to forget about this kind of data and then work only with these kind of signatures and go further and further. Okay? So it seems very simple. There are, of course, some challenging aspects. First of all, we don't want to go through all this training procedure. We don't, first of all, we don't have that many data. I mean, we don't have that many exemplars, so we only know a few ones, so we cannot even run any ML-based or machine learning-based technique on it, because we cannot really train them relevantly. And then we would like to keep it lightweight, usable in different contexts, mainly efficient for interactive design. And there are many different problems that you can think of. Here I will talk about mainly the way we would synthesize this kind of distributions and analyze them using known tools. For example, characterizing different point patterns were traditionally performed using either Fourier or spatial indeed tools. So by I think you are aware of this spatial statistical tools, namely pair correlation functions, which is nothing else than a kind of relative or average density over the domain. So given given a point, I will just grow a set of circles around it, like, and I will try to see what are the number of neighbors that I have at a specific radius. So, and then I will try to take the average graphs of these things and come up with some statistical signatures from those. So these notions exist. They are used traditionally for point pattern synthesis, but the fact is that they are not, the models are not complete yet, in the sense that handling multi-attribute, multi-class data is quite challenging, and also we are not still so efficient in terms of optimization. So I will be more precise during the following slides. First of all, let me just show how characteristics are these PCFs. So as you can see, for different point distribution here, you can see really somehow the correlation between their points, or the way they're embedded on the plane through the PCF. So like the first peak that you can see on the graph would somehow give you an idea of the smallest distance between clusters of points, if I can call them like this. So you have 3 examples here. You have a random one, I think, a very famous one that we call blue noise. It was named for this, for its spectral properties, indeed, in the statistical community, which is widely used in the computer graphics community as well, because of its good properties in terms of minimum distance, etc., etc. And also visually, it has been proven to be quite pleasant to do steeple art and other kind of object placement, for example. And then you have other kind of, let's say, more structured patterns that you can see, in which, again, the PCF seems to be a good signature to analyze them, right? So, and the idea to synthesize this kind of patterns from a given sampler or from a PCF that was extracted from it would be to just do a very simple dart throwing algorithm followed by some refinement to really adjust the final result. So maybe you are not so convinced, but you will see that that's indeed enough to do lots of things indeed at this stage. What I was interested in was the case of disks. So very simple about, okay, so send it to a distance. It doesn't need to be a real metric. It's just a very simple distance measurement that would allow us to distinguish between these configurations. But it turns out that it didn't exist, at least to my knowledge, before that work. And for example, in the ecosystem, let's say, virtual world authoring literature, the way it was done in order to analyze this kind of disk distribution was very simple, primitive, in the sense that they were, as far as the 2 disks were not intersecting each other, that was just a simple distance between their boundaries. And then as soon as they were overlapping, that was a kind of discrete value setting that would allow them to somehow take care of these cases. But one can think of other classical tools in computational geometry, for example. The power distance or Laguerre distance would be maybe a good distance, but you can see that it was not done, it was not defined for this kind of purposes. It does not allow you to somehow distinguish between different configurations, the one that we were interested in. And it would be simply positive, negative, or only it would vanish the case where they are orthogonal to each other. So it's not really the one that I was looking for. So again, we came up with a solution that at the first glance would appear somehow random, but the fact is that it's just based on some basic geometric properties between what we call the extent and overlap between disks. So by doing that, you would be able to somehow control the value of the distance between these disks, and by normalizing, so based on the, I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, based on the values that you would find for that function f that I'm suggesting with a simple geometric formula, you can also normalize it in order to have the following setting, in the sense that as soon as you have like distinct or non-overlapping disks, you would have you would have a value that would be bigger than a constant here. I set it to be 3. And then as soon as they start to be tangent, that would be 3. That would be, for example, for the case of circle packing. And then when they start to overlap, it would be 2. And when it is included less than 1, etc., etc. So you see that with these simple ideas, adaptation of the metric, that would be easy to do. You are able to integrate somehow, inject a new metric to the PCF analysis that you would have in order to be able to generate, let's say, a better synthesis algorithm somehow. As you can see, the original exemplar on top left is the one that is represented through this rendered version, and the one that is synthesized using this extended PCFs is something that is not simply a copy and paste of what we had before, but at least visually it looks like a similar distribution. And the only measurement that we have in this case is the fact that the 2 PCFs are matching. And that allows you indeed to come up with some nice automatized algorithms that would perfectly set different objects of different categories automatically at the right place. For example, based on this just multi-class data set, I could manage to render a data set. We could manage to render a data set that would nicely place like the apples on the plates, the Smarties inside and not on the table. You know, this kind of geometric configuration could be hard if you wanted to really model it differently, not through this kind of metric adaptation. So a very simple example to motivate adaptation of traditional or classical tools to the applicative scenarios. And just to be complete in terms of the analysis of multi-class synthesis, you need to come up with the nice modeling of this hierarchy of clusters. For example, in the case of ecosystem, what we have tried to do in order to have the nice correlation between different points of different clusters was to define a topological order, an order in the cluster, saying that, for example, the big trees are placed at the first place. Once the statistical features is preserved and nicely replicated, we will just try to match the other PCFs that would take into account the lower level categories around these big categories, etc., etc. So for each pairs of classes, you would have a set of PCFs, and based on that, you can generate a new algorithm that would take into account all the interclass PCFs based on this hierarchy and generate such complex ecosystems with here in this case, I think we had 9 classes through this automatic PCF handling. Okay? An applicative scenario that shows how we can adapt these tools to the context and, for example, in this case, these configurations that we needed. So, and amazingly, these statistical signatures are enough to preserve both local and global statistical properties. So, and to finish just this parenthesis on ecosystem synthesis, we can go farther by incorporating, for example, directional information in it. For example, in the case of herd animation, we managed to just analyze it as a kind of vector field interpolation or synthesis to adapt, for example, the movement and the shape of a herd of animal, given some input, for example, that can come from pictures, and then animate the virtual world with these moving herds of animals and completed with some data from environment like humidity, climatic conditions, etc. We can try to instantiate what we call food chain with the nice modeling of movement of herds of animals based on the resources that they have and the map of the terrain. We are able to even, for example, generate and find the trails that are taken by many like herds of animals. And here we are matching the synthesized data with real-world images of Grand Canyon to show how they match to each other. So this was in the context of a common, a collaboration with paleontologists of Totavel in France that wanted to somehow see and visualize the data that they have gathered during decennies, like during years and days, and see how they would replicate, that they could form a consistent ecosystem. Again, as a final note on this part of the talk, I would like to say that in this area, what we are providing as, for example, synthesized version of these distributions or food chain instantiation is just a consistent solution. And it's not necessarily the exact solution that one would look for. For example, it's different from the work of colleagues in applied math who are trying to precisely model like food chains, their interaction between movement of herds of animals, etc. There, the results should be reliable and guaranteed in the sense that they will take some decisions based on that. In this visual world authoring context, at least, it has been validated as a consistent solution, but it cannot be somehow used as the unique solution in this context. So again, the context of application can be different in different projects. So if there is no question on that, I would like to continue by saying a few words about another facet of this kind of research on point pattern synthesis with attributes. And this project has started with this kind of challenging data set that we had. We thought, what about data where you have not only different classes, you have also different attributes in the sense that in the same class you have different sizes, different orientation, and you would like to be able to nicely replicate this information in the extended domain as well. So it's exactly what I've told you. It would be only 2 coordinates in the embedding space in the planar canvas that we will have, and then all the attributes that can be correlated to each other. We don't know, and for the moment we don't do any dimension reduction of the corresponding manifold or whatever. We are just trying to replicate it in order to have something which is visually interesting in this context. And here is one of the toy examples that I can show you. From a given input, we try to encode all the clusters and their classes and their attributes. That would be the result of the algorithm. I will explain how we do that. And as you can see, the result is visually consistent and compatible with what we wanted to do in this setting. So I will be quite quick on this part. The only important remark here would be, first of all, the fact that structures in this context are really hard to encode, in the sense that if you start with a grid, if there is a kind of intrinsic structure in this data, of course, using PCFs, which are just average density information, you cannot nicely synthesize it, of course. So this is a quite obvious fact. And also, the fact is that we can only work with stationary and isotropic distributions. But knowing that, let us just see what are the different tools that one can use in order to synthesize this kind of distribution. One of the state-of-the-art works is the one that I'm showing here. They are trying to indeed make a bridge between what we are doing in point pattern synthesis, and the quite advanced tools that have been developed in image processing community. In image processing community, they have some freshly trained features that they call VGG19, and that would allow them to go through this big CNN machinery in order to do this kind of extension from the middle exemplar to the extended version. As you can see, it's almost perfect, and what our colleagues in this work had tried to do was to just make a bridge to that, rasterize the point pattern data that they had as an image, and try to apply this well-known algorithm on it, and try to go back to this space of point pattern. So as you can see, it works quite well, although it would require some big training in this context, and as we will see, there are also some other drawbacks. So what I would like to highlight with this collaboration that we had with MPI colleagues, colleagues at Max Planck Institute, is the fact that we can maybe borrow in some situations some of the machine learning techniques that were developed recently in order to come up with a light learning technique, where from an exemplar, for example, you can have these convolutional layers that would allow you to see all the statistical features of the exemplar, for example, through what the famous Gabor filters, directional filtering of your data, and see how far you can go in terms of usage of this statistical signatures through CNN setting. And this is what we have done. The idea is to use these Gabor feature functions, indeed combined with this multi-resolutional convolutional filtering. And then based on that, we will compute gram matrices and correlation matrices and use them in our loss function. Again, no training is is necessary in this context. And the only thing that we would do is to do a kind of optimization based on this loss, the combined version of gram loss function and correlation loss functions that are computed. Here is the pipeline complete. You can see that from this, we will try to compute the Gabor filters. We will have this indeed random filtering that is add to it. So with some nonlinear, activation functions that we add on top of it. The idea is that at the end of this process, we will come up with those two loss functions that are sufficient for us to do this optimization from the very initial Poisson disk initialization toward the final result of synthesized distribution. So as you can see, it allows even to come up with results, convincing results for structured data, something that we couldn't do before. But here given that we are applying Gabor filters in different directions, we are able to nicely capture these statistical features as well. If there are any questions regarding this, I can come back to it. It's just to show you kind of comparison between what we could do before and what can be done now, thanks to this setting, which is trainingless and lightweight somehow. And of course, unlike all the image processing linked models, what we can do is to also consider it for multi-attribute and multi-class data by just concatenating these Gabor features that we have and run the same machinery to generate this kind of data, something that was not possible before. So by doing this new, by using this new setting, we are able also to handle this. So yeah, so that was the objective that I fixed before. But as you can see, first of all, it's not perfect yet. And also, it remains still quite slow in the sense that the optimization process, of course, you can add more and more attributes, and it becomes more and more slow and sometimes unstable. It doesn't converge well once you have many attributes attached to it. Okay, so and mainly, for example, it's not convenient for interactive synthesis, right? That would not be something that you can use as a real-time application. And as I told you, it's we don't have really precise statistical measurements apart from the ones that we are using to use it, for example, in the context of, I don't know, neuroimaging or applications where really some guarantees are required. So, and I would like to indeed finish this very first introductive part by an important note on the applicative context of these geometric data analysis techniques. I think what is important to highlight here is that each context, each applicative context would have its own specific difficulties and specificities. I mean, in the sense that, for example, if you are working with this kind of data, galaxies where you have this 2D dimensional embedding and many attributes that are attached to it, one can think of, okay, applying the same kind of geometric and statistical tools adapted to this context. First of all, they do not scale up very well. And the second question, which is still open, this very surprising to me when I talked to some of my colleagues in statistical community, they told me that we have no nice metric mixture. Metric mixtures, let's call it like this, in order to nicely handle this variety or diversity in the parameter set. In the sense that if I consider such a data as a high-dimensional point set, while each of these parameters that can be correlated with, but as a coordinate of geometric in this high-dimensional geometric space, how to nicely define the nice metric on this probably Riemannian submanifold that would have a lower intrinsic dimension. What are the nice metric mixture or nice computational tools that we can apply in this setting? And that would be maybe one of my questions to this audience. Maybe we can discuss that. What are the existing tools that you are aware of that would allow us to better formalize this setting? For example, in this very specific applicative context, when I know that I have some limited number of my coordinates that come from the embedding, that are linked to the spatial information, and some other that have very different properties or nature. In this case, that would be the form of the galaxy, its mass, the temperature, etc., that can be correlated between each other. What would be the nice setting to handle this data in general? The formulation would be to say that we, at least in my research community, we have this traditional, let's say, way of representing this kind of data with different attributes as a high-dimensional point set, where you have each of the parameters or attributes as one of the coordinates in this Rn setting. And you can think of this as a set of coordinates where you know exactly a subpart that comes from the Euclidean geometry, somehow the spatial information, a part that might be even linked to an uncertain data that can be a kind of statistical manifold. You can apply Fisher metric or whatever you want. A part that has nothing to do with that, it's just a labeling information, type of the galaxy, etc. What would be the nice combination in terms of the metric that we need to use or the methodologies that we need to use in order to apply our computational tools in this setting? Something with guarantees, with some nice formal framework where we can do some measurement. You know, what would be the nice setting in this context? I mean, that's very open, right? And we can, of course, come up with some solutions. We can just simply interpolate, combine them, do the reconstruction completely independently, and then do. But that would be interesting to think about this context, because each of us is working on its kind of theoretical tools that have very specific like setting with nicely defined like measurement tools, etc., etc. But once we have to deal with this complex data sets, what are the nice formalization? I mean, how to handle them? I mean, it's a very vague question, but it's interesting to formalize it. I think maybe it's easy for many of you, but I mean, at least my community would be very interested in that. And I would be very happy to discuss it, because I think that was what I planned, because this is something that I would like to talk about. That's indeed a very linked question. For the moment, we are just linearly interpolating. I mean, we just do a combination with some weights that we are manually adjusting. If we do it very well, we can just train it to find the right parameter coefficient. But what's the formal answer to this kind of question? How to formulate it? Is there maybe there is no answer to it, but I would be really interested. This is exactly a good example to show. For example, for these two loss functions, we have two ingredients, and we don't know how to combine them, how to mix them. The only thing that we know is by adding weights and considering the. It's hard, right? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm not I mean, from a statistical point of view, maybe there are some existing work, but I'm not aware of it. So that would be nice to have some recipes, at least for our community, to say, okay, finally, if you're interested by all these kind of like measurements, the right way to mix them up, given that intuition that we know, would be this. But I didn't find that, at least according to my, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, it doesn't exist. It might be very naive question, but would be very interesting for many applications, I think. So if there is no more questions, let me just continue by saying that, okay, when we are interested in this kind of guarantees, reliability of the results, we can have a different direction, but once, for example, the efficiency is of interest, then you can come up with very ad hoc solutions. For example, in the case of, we had a kind of a sketch-based interface that was supposed to be used by scientists, for example, biologists in doing cell biology to show different phenomena, and they wanted us to have something very simple and almost real time that would allow them to have a simple sketch, having an extension and probably a 3D extension, and then be able to use them for their project communication, their collaboration, and also in their teaching as a tool. So here you would not apply a big hammer to this kind of synthesis, because that would be, first of all, very, very slow, and having precise like this would not be really meaningful. So in this setting, for example, we try to have a hierarchical supporting linear structure that would just have a kind of hierarchy of linear structures that would cluster different layers of these features, elements on the pattern, and then come up with the coarse to fine, and then coarse to fine analysis, and fine to coarse synthesis to come up with this kind of solutions. So it's just to say that sometimes for some applications, our formal and nice mathematical tools with guarantees, etc., are really not adapted. And in order to do this kind of setting, I would not use more complex techniques than the one that I just presented to you. And that works indeed, and that's perfectly sufficient for them. So another typical example of light learning synthesis. And once we talk with people working on cell immigration, etc., that's indeed the tool that they are missing still at this age. We are in computer graphics, we have like very advanced computational tools that are applied to 3D, high-dimensional data analysis, etc. But even for the 2D case of cell biology studies, in order to study the cell immigration, etc., they have no tools, they have no computational toolboxes that would allow them to do at least bigger examples than this one. This is a quite recent paper, not maybe the recent one that I had, but in all of those you see this kind of illustration. So we are far from being able to really transfer our knowledge in geometry and computational tools to them, so which is very unfortunate. I will soon close the parenthesis, but I would like to tell you something else because it's somehow linked to some techniques that talk to you. Also in art design, this distribution synthesis and analysis would be very interesting and are used commonly in the computer graphics community, where you have some strokes that are just distributed over the domain, 2D domain, and you would like to analyze it, learn from it to, for example, learn the style of the artist in terms of drawing. If you have, for example, the order of these strokes, that would be very interesting too, to be able to mimic it, to analyze it, to segment it, and to do many other different manipulations that you can think of on this kind of paintings. So that would be the same thing. These are like, you can see it as discrete distributions that I told you, rather than having this radii for disks, that would be the orientation, and probably sometimes the length of the strokes. So nothing really theoretically hard to consider, the same as here for this kind of portrait, but you see that for each of these applications, the fact that you know the theoretical tools doesn't mean that you can immediately apply them. There are some specific challenges to be able to apply them, and then you see that there are enough research components, not at the same level in terms of theoretical difficulties, that need to be considered and developed here to be able to see really the very end of the end of the project. For example, in this context, we are trying to use some Lie group setting to lift this kind of data segments up to a higher dimensional space to see how they are. That would be much easier to see them based on the orientation than to better analyze them. But again, we are stuck at the very first place of nicely even extracting these features, these segments, strokes from this. So you see that we can talk about these applications in many areas, at least in the pointerism style. I can say you a few words about what we can do for art editing. That is the very last part of my introductive lecture today. That was quite diverse in terms of applications, but you will see that the basis is geometry, and very basic indeed geometric tools at the end of the day. So here's the very last part of my talk on how to do now user-friendly discrete distribution editing in this case. And to do that, we will make a very basic observation, very basic one, the fact that point patterns are composed of density and correlation. For example, in this example, you can see only spatially varying density. In the middle, you can see that the density is fixed. Indeed, if I show the density map, it's completely constant, but the correlation between the points are very different. So these are known as different noises, types of noises in considering the power spectrum of these patterns. So you have blue noise, you have pink noise, and other green noise, and other kind of correlations that we can again measure with our traditional PCF functions. Right? And then you can mix them up and have both varying like density and correlation. So here is the density map that you can see. You have the same density map for the first and the last example, but the correlations are changing. So the idea here was to, again, to have a representative technique for the correlation, and why not, for example, making a bridge between what we can do, what we want to do here, and what we can do in, for example, image processing community. And so to represent correlations by colors. So in order to say, the animation was removed, but doesn't matter, we will see it later. There are some existing work in terms of the space of correlation, PCF-based representation of correlations. The fact is that, they were used, for example, based synthesis. The fact is that the space that was considered in that context was not perceptual driven indeed, and the editing correlation that was proposed there was limited to the examples that they had. So we had to somehow extend it properly in order to have a nice embedding somehow of the space of correlations. That we don't know, by the way, how big is this space, what's the intrinsic dimension of it at all, but to embed it to a two-dimensional space where we can encode it by color. And it's exactly what we have done. And here, our classical geometric modeling tools were not sufficient. We had to go through some learning techniques because we had to somehow do this dimensional reduction process there, and in order to have a nice estimation between different correlations, we had to go through these VGG19 features that I mentioned to you. So here is the final, I will show you how we end up with this embedding, but just to tell you where we are going to, the final embedding that we are finding is a two-dimensional space where each point, let's say a very local position here, would correspond to a correlation itself. For example, if you look at the different positions that are shown on this colored example, they represent different positions on this space, and you can see the corresponding correlations there. So the density is constant here, and only the correlation is varying, and it's supposed to cover a good set of correlations, at least based on what we could generate using our famous PCF. So how do we do that? In order to do that, we start by generating 1,000 of point sets with different correlations as bases. And our goal was to, again, embed them in this correlation into a two-dimensional coordinate system. So that can be somehow realized by color. Okay, so as I told you, we are using this VGG features network to extract multi-layer features from it. Again, classical gram matrices from the dot product between these features. And then once we have that, we compute the dissimilarity matrix between these features, and then optimize indeed the latent coordinate to preserve the distance given by these matrices, so that at the end of the day, when we end up with this 2D latent state space, we have quite consistent distances based on these VGG features between correlations and their embedded positions, right? So in the sense that if we have two patterns that are quite similar to each other in the sense of PCF measurement, they should be not far from each other in the color. And if you have two quite similar colors, we don't want to have big change in the patterns that are mapped to them. So this is the way it works, and based on that, we can do this analysis towards synthesis from like a colored picture to point patterns, and also on the other side, from a point pattern, we can try to learn how to generate these kind of colors based on the correlation that we are computing, and then do some editing through popular editing tools of image processing, etc., in order to edit the corresponding point pattern and output the edited. So for this, sometimes we need to have, for example, a kind of age-aware PCF computation, in the sense that given that you have some discontinuities in the image that appears naturally, we need to be able to, in the computation of the PCF, you need to be able to have a kind of consistent definition of the PCF. So we are using a bilateral definition of it. So I'm skipping the details, but you can think of a very simple application of this counting the like close points and far points in the space of PCFs in order to do this kind of bilateral computation. So I don't know if the video is working. I hope yes. So it shows how easy would be in this case the addition of point patterns, because you're just editing the corresponding image using, for example, in this case, Photoshop tools. And I will skip it. This is the kind of edit that you can do using that. But more interestingly, you can make the best use of all the features in image processing toolboxes to do, for example, here content-aware fill of this exemplar, and then do this kind of extension of quite weird pattern that I had as input. So if you apply existing like state-of-the-art tools in point pattern synthesis, that would give you something which is much less relevant than what you would obtain using this bridge to image processing. So I still have 10 minutes left, including questions. If there is no particular question, I have some another application that is really, really important to myself that I would like to mention. And given that this first lecture was not too technical, I guess there is no yet, so it'll be coming. So I would like to finish with further applications. And this is really the one that was very surprising to me, but I really, really like it personally. And by further applications, I would like to say, okay, what else? What we can do with this toolbox that we have? I'm a very visual person, and at some point when I think about people who cannot really see the beauty of the world that we can see, I really feel like I need to help them. It's my duty to help them, and to also bring all the computational tools that we have in computer graphics to those people in order to enjoy also the visual content that we can appreciate. So what else you can guess that would be something that I would call as continuous braille. So you all know about Braille, who did this fantastic work of like introduction of this braille language. So for me, it's the most discrete setting that you can think of point patterns. So now you know where I'm trying to go. There are some extensions of it in order to somehow encode contours as tactile patterns through dots, etc. But having a real continuous braille through these point patterns would be something that I really dream of. And this discrete versus continuous pattern encoding was at the very first place my main objective in this project. I thought that would be a very straightforward framework that I can do, and then, okay, bye-bye, I did my contribution. But it's not at all the way I would see it, because first of all, according to our very first prototypes, they are very hard to be perceived. And to give you some context, I started to get interested into this topic, and I've just realized that there is more than 1 billion people living with like vision loss worldwide, according to quite older report now already, and only 6 million of them use Braille. And we really need to support this tactile document generation in general. And I know that there are some movements in museums to make all the paintings, etc., accessible. For example, here you can see an example of a tactile book where you see that such a complex landscape can be perceived, at least partially, by visually impaired people. But the idea of really transferring this rich visual content through only haptic perception is something which seems really challenging. So we had to go with my collaborators through different fabrication techniques to see what would be the best solution that we were looking for. We wanted to have something low cost, portable, accessible for prototype fabrication. I mean, I'm going somehow on the opposite side of the current flow in my community. We are more and more using advanced toolboxes, like very, very fancy and complex haptic tools with this gloves that come in. In addition to all this virtual world equipments, etc., I'm looking for something that has really, really low haptic charge, is accessible, it's low cost, and can be used really to transfer this visual information. But I'm sure that in my community, as well as yours, there are some techniques that are very basic and quite old that can be applied and made accessible to those people. So the best, tool that we found was this simple, something that I call four a pizza. So it's a swell machine that just hits some specific papers that are called swell papers that get deformed when you have some information on it. So based on the parts that you like to deform, you can just give a PDF to it, and it generates you this tactile support. And now, given this context, I think we can do many things. We can first of all try to provide more formalism to this haptic perception pipeline. And there are many ongoing work in this direction, but I think we are really missing measurements and evaluation tools. So there are some people who are using EEG systems for to directly see how this data is integrated or perceived by these people. But I think in geometry, we can do more basic things that can be used in this direction. Of course, the surface material is very important, and the evaluation. And so, as I told you, we just realized that point patterns are not the best tools to just do this haptic transfer for these people. They are not nicely perceived. At least they didn't learn yet to read these kind of patterns, the correlation between these points. So we had to extend the space of patterns that we had. They are more familiar to geometric patterns with structures. And this is the way we can just transfer the message. And then we just realized that there is no distance. Of course, there is no appropriate metric there to for example, if you want to provide for a given, let's say, map, if you want to, rather than coloring it, if you want to provide some patterns to make it tactile, you need to be able to see how distinguishable they are. We realized that our visual perception is very different from haptic perception. Some patterns that seem very, very different to us visually are are not even distinguishable by haptic perception. So we had to just develop a kind of prototype to measure the relative haptic distance between patterns. And it's very hard to ask them to give us numbers, of course. This is not something that can be, you cannot have quantities. You can just have some dissimilarity information and try to come up with some conclusion at the end based on the number of users that you had at the end. The other thing is just the importance of boundary between two patterns, etc. So it's much more complex than when I was thinking, and also the support and all this multisensorial modeling that are ongoing and that can be further developed are really interesting and enriching for us. So, and we would like to mainly, help them in terms of navigation, because talking to real users, people with visual impairment, at the very first place I wanted to provide to them like nice painting, etc. They said, oh, we cannot even move easily. In even big cities where we have maps, etc., you're still missing tools for navigation. And there are different technologies, but some of them are either too costly or not maintained anymore, they are not supported anymore, or they are too heavy in terms of haptic charge or audio charge. So there are tons of things that can be done in this direction. And it really leads me to some fantastic but surprising, again, application that would be multisensorial perception. I mean, if at some point we can just share what we see on this picture with someone who's like visually impaired, I think that would be the end of my research in this direction, because it's so infinite dimensional. I cannot describe it ni by words, ni by even tactile patterns, etc. It's something that comes from our infinite dimensional perception. Although the support that we are seeing is two-dimensional, our own interpretation is completely, cannot be modeled through finite unlimited model. And I would like to finish with this nice picture saying that all I presented today was very, maybe not too technical, but that was just to give you this take-home message that what we are doing can be also completed as a kind of part-time research project by other applications where there are some needs, and there are not necessarily big fundings for them. There are not necessarily too many advertisements around this kind of topics. You can, what you are doing would be very, very valuable in this kind of applicative scenarios. And of course, we can go much further with interdisciplinary collaboration. And this is indeed what we have done, and I would like to make the best use of this opportunity to first of all thank all my collaborators, mainly these ones who helped me for the projects that I presented today. And these are the corresponding references, all these students and colleagues who are working right now on accessibility ongoing project that I presented. I also briefly mentioned the art design project that we have, that another colleague, so it's another ongoing project. So, and I thank you all for your time and attention. Thank you.